Yeah, we can start.
So welcome everyone for
This one
new
or this?
seminar. So today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Pradeep Choudhury, who's assistant professor at the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at the School of Social Sciences of JNU in Delhi. Before joining JNU, Pradeep Choudhury worked as a faculty at the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development and as a research fellow at the Public Health Foundation of India and the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He's also the China-India Visiting Scholar Fellow at Ashoka University and serves as the Vice President of the International Longevity Economics Network in Paris. His recent works focus on educational inequality, privatization of education and market policies, skills and skill development, as well as family investment in education. He recently completed an international comparative study on assessing and improving the quality of higher education with Stanford University in the US. He's also currently collaborating with the Delhi Knowledge Cluster for the theme Effective Education, which is an initiative of the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. His recent works have appeared in peer-reviewed journals like International Journal of Educational Development, Economic and Political Weekly, as well as the Indian Journal of Human Development. These are only a few of them. And his co-edited volume entitled Contextualizing Educational Studies in India, Research Policy and Practices was published by Routledge last year. Today, his talk will be entitled Mind the Gap, Analyzing Inequality in Higher Education in India. Before I hand the mic to him, I would first like to introduce his discussants. So today we have two discussants for his work. First of all, Professor Odile Henry, who's a sociologist. She's the director of CSH and a full professor at Paris 8 in Paris. Her early research explored from a sociological and ethnographic perspective the world of large consulting firms in France. Since 2014, she moved to the Indian fieldwork to examine social inequalities in engineering schools and more largely in Indian higher education. First, as part of the Engined Research Program, which was an ANR program, and since 2018 as part of the SP project on the effects of the very strong development of private higher education in developing countries. The second discussant is Claire Calvel, who is a student at the INS Paris-Saclay and also an intern at the CSH. She has a master's degree from the Paris School of Economics and specializes in the evaluation of public policies from an econometric point of view. At the CSH, she's working under the supervision of Odile Henry and works with her on the effects of privatization of higher education on inequality in India. More specifically, she works on the existing databases on education to bring a quantitative perspective to the analysis. So welcome to him, and I would like to again thank Pradeep Choudhury for presenting his work today. So let me remind you of the title, Mind the Gap, Analyzing Inequality in Higher Education in India. Thank you.
So now you can share the screen. So am I audible to that also? Is it? I think this will take care of this machine.
So you don't have to take care of the audio. Everyone would be hearing you both in the room and online.
Good. Good afternoon to all, and thank you, Professor Odile, for inviting me. I sincerely thank you and your team for bringing me here. Relatively young scholar speaking on some ideas. So let us see how I can go ahead. I also see Nicholas here. So thank you here. So hope all well there. We'll be interacting, I think, in the Q&A. Definitely we'll have some questions. So let me start then without losing time. So how much time will I have? Around
it is
35 minutes?
Yeah, I have got so much of stuff, but I will try my best. Let us see. So this is the title, I think, that has been said already, Mind the Gap, Analyzing Inequality in Higher Education in India. So I don't know whether I should speak on why higher education matter to all of us. So that's to answer this time. But still I want to focus a few points on why higher education matters to all of us. So that will be there. No issue.
It's not possible to reduce a little bit.
You mean this bar, right?
To be able to read.
Anyway. So let me go ahead. An important idea that is being nurtured in the literature is higher education is a public good. And I think we almost know this very clearly, that how higher education produces externalities that actually brings prosperity in the society. So there is a clear externality that is being, several externalities that are being produced by the higher education system. And that's the reason it is being argued as a public good. And in some cases, even Simon Marginson and several other economists, including Tilak also, they have argued that let it. Yeah. So that is something called global public good, and that is being argued in the context of higher education. So this is one important idea that the new externalities that we are nowadays talking about, because that gives socio-political and even economic externalities, but there are some technological and dynamic externalities that have been produced in the higher education system. And altogether, what I want to argue is it produces substantial social benefits. So there is a substantial social benefits that higher education produces, and that's the reason we call it as a global public. What actually doing in the context of some of the recent writing of Tilak that clearly brings out how higher education produces skilled labor for knowledge economy, because nowadays almost all the economies in the world, they are heading towards knowledge economy, and there we need professionals and skilled labor, and higher education is one sector that produces skilled labor. And it is being argued that this is a key factor to bring countries out of the developing economy syndrome. For example, in the context of India, it is being argued that if India wants to come out of the developing economy syndrome, which is being continued for a long, so you have to strengthen your higher education system. So that's the argument, and that is also true in many other countries' context. World Bank has clearly argued that economic returns of higher education graduates are the highest in the education level. If you see the entire pyramid of education, so you will clearly find in the educational system, economic returns to higher education is the highest. So that also related to the technology that is being coming out in the labor market, because that is changing the nature of work. There is a report of World Bank in 2019, which is on changing nature of work. So there it is being argued that if there is a changing nature of work due to the intervention of the technology, then how higher education matters in that context. Because if there is a dynamic change in the labor market, to adapt the labor to kind of the disruptions that is happening in the labor market, to adjust with the disruptions, how the higher education helps. So that is an important argument that is being given. I would say there the argument is it connects to the new development dynamic. New development dynamic, I include the labor market as well as social and socio-political dynamic that is happening in the society. So higher education is connecting well to that. It also brings competitiveness. So it clearly brings competitiveness in the economy and society. So it improves competitiveness, because competitiveness is one important feature of the society, economy and society at the global level, and for many developing economies, including India. The other important point that has come out very clearly, because this brings modernization, because modernization has an important feature in the economies and society. So it brings clearly it brings the modernization in the economy and society, which also brings social transformation. It's not only modernization in terms of labor market and economy, it also brings social transformations. So it is being argued that the societies with higher levels of education, they are socially better, they are civilized. So in that context, in Indian context, I would say very clearly that, for example, there is an increasing visibility of inter-caste marriage. I would give you an example. Caste system is an important particular feature in the Indian society, where there is a hierarchy of caste. So there, earlier it was not the case. Inter-caste marriage was a social evil. Even today that is being there, but it is being reduced to some extent. And some of the writings that clearly says it is because of the higher education. Like the people are being educated, so there is a less punishment, like punishment to going for inter-caste marriage is reducing. So that may be one of the examples where social transformation is happening. There are many other social transformation happening, including women empowerment and many other indicators. So the other important thing that I want to bring in is, can you that chapter? No, sorry, that message is coming in between. If you can, yeah.
When
so
the
it
message
also
comes in the chat box, I have to check.
Okay. but we can check after 15 minutes of that kind. Let us see. So then the other important point that is being said, even Sen's argument that clearly says that it produces capabilities. But I would say, he has argued very clearly that how the basic education produces capabilities, but I would here argue that if the higher education produces several new and dynamic capabilities. That was not the case in basic education, which is the case in higher education. So that new and dynamic capabilities that higher education produces brings the society to a different levels. And India is a society that needs dynamic capabilities among the women, among the marginalized, among the poor, socially and economically marginalized sections. And that's what higher education can bring in. So that's the argument that is going on. The other important argument that is happening is it improves equity. That is clear. Fosters well-being and higher quality of life, because better the higher the level of higher education among the citizens, then definitely it will bring well-being in the society. UNESCO 2002 report, that Task Force on Higher Education and Society, that clearly argues that higher education is the modern world's basic education. It's no more the basic as such, luxury. It's a basic education for all. So we should get into the, I think almost all the citizens in the country should get higher education. So that's the kind of argument they have given. If you see the SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4, that also aims to ensure equal access and affordable higher education, quality higher education to all by 2030. So there is a re-estimation going on because of the COVID. But anyway, that was the idea, that let us give higher education to all, which is equitable and also quality. There is a higher quality of higher education. So what I'm trying to say overall, that education and higher education in particular, therefore have a special place in development. That is being argued clearly. And this is also clearly emphasized in the international development literature. So there is no, I don't think there is another set of argument to it, like this is not what this is. So that's the kind of argument that is being established in the literature. Yeah, see. I think it is not connected. I can say next, so somebody can. So the other important thing that I am, while I am saying this, there are some theoretical arguments to it, but we can also bring some empirical evidence to it, how higher education actually connects to the development. So when I'm saying, I think you will get some figures there. So there is a clear linkage between higher education and GDP per capita. No issue. I will take. I think technically this will be always there. I think the sensor is.
Worse format.
Yeah, the sensor was not working. But I can go ahead a bit. Yeah. So if you see that we did, I think Tilak and myself, Professor Tilak and myself, we did a study on this on the before one. Yeah. So there we found that how actually the higher education matters in GDP per capita. So the countries with higher level of higher education measured through the gross enrollment ratio in higher education. So higher the GDP per capita, you can say there is a clear increasing trend with a few exceptions, like Singapore, for example, is a clear case where the higher the gross enrollment ratio, higher is the GDP per capita. So there is a clear connection to that. Next one, I am not giving time to this. Similarly, we have a higher education and poverty. With the higher level of education, there is a reduction in the poverty. I am just giving some empirical evidence to this, some descriptive figures. Next one. Similarly, if you see, it is being said that there is something called gross innovation index, which is WIPO that brings it. So there also we try to see how the expenditure on higher education as a percentage of GDP brings higher gross innovation index. So that there is overall what I am trying to say, that it clearly brings a relationship between higher education and several other developmental indicators. If you say that, by looking at the nexus between higher education and development, we find that there is a clear global expansion of higher education in terms of GR we have said here. Like if you look at the geographical regions as well as regions by national income, which is divided by the countries by income groups. So there you clearly see that there is a clear hierarchy, like inequality in the expansion of higher education at the global level. Sub-Saharan Africa, you see the lowest, and there is an increase, but increase is very less for them. Still, only 10% of the total population are accessing in the eligible population group, 18 to 23 in the international level. So they are less than 10% in Sub-Saharan Africa, but it's almost 87% in North America. Similarly, by regions of national income, if you divide, there also there is a clear hierarchy. And in world average, we are still less than 40% of GR. Next. Who all are in the top in GER? These are the countries which are in the top. You can see few, and India only now almost 28.57%, GER 27-28%, but many other countries, which is lower than the world average. But there are several countries which are doing really better, and there are countries like largely European countries and even largely European and even North American countries. They are doing far better. GR in Asia Pacific, if you make a comparison, still India is not doing better because we have a comparative picture of this several countries, China, Malaysia, and even some of the irony is some of the countries having less like GDP, even per capita GDP, they are also doing a little better than India as well. There are some countries which are not doing at par with India, is like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia, and a few other countries. Growth of higher education in India, you see very clearly there is a clear increase. In 1950s, when almost in the initial stage of independence, the country had only 578 colleges and 28 universities. That has expanded significantly. We have huge number of colleges, close to 43,000, and we have more than 1,000 universities with almost 39 million students in the entire system. So there is a clear expansion in the higher education in the country. Now let me explain few points. What are the different achievements and different disappointments in the higher education system that is important to understand before getting into the inequality issues? We have some achievements very clearly. We have a quantitative expansion. It is being argued by Varghese, Tilak, and several other economists who work on this area. So there is a growing demand for higher education. Secondary graduates, they are entering into higher education system. We call our higher education system, India's higher education system is the second largest higher education system in the world after US. Higher education system is able to ensure self-sufficiency in manpower requirements. We are producing huge number of graduates, but quality and all that is a separate issue. I may get in afterwards, but we are producing good number of graduates. We have also proved establishing high quality institutions like IITs, IIMs, Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Management, Indian Institute of Science, a few good universities in the country. So what is happening in the system? We have transformed our higher education system from an elite stage of higher education to a stage of massification. If you see in 1960s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, early 2000, it was a kind of elite. People from rich families and from socially advantaged sections, they were the people who were accessing, but now it is getting into a stage of massification. Our classrooms structure is changing. Many students from socially and marginalized sections of the students are entering into the higher education system. So Varghese has clearly argued this, that how the Indian higher education system is changing. But at the same time, we have some distractions, disappointments. So we have access, increased access, but without equity, which is a major focus of today's talk. We have access, but without equity, which I have called inequalities in higher education. We have massification of higher education without maintaining quality, that is being argued. I may not be focusing on all these issues. I may be focusing on the first one, given the time. We have unemployment of the educated. So that is an important point that we are seeing. Issues of graduate employability has come up very clearly. And the other one, which is one important reason for all of the three regions, is declining public funding. So we are not giving enough attention. The state is not giving enough attention to the higher education sector as it is perceived. Why is all this happening? Let me. There are several interesting studies on this, but let me focus on a few and some of the important policy dimensions to this. There is a radical shift in the thinking on the nature and role of higher education in the context of India particularly. If I see that the trend is clear, particularly in the post-90s, when I say there is a radical shift in the thinking on the nature, I bring 2-3 important points. The point that I'm trying to bring is the policy that is in the context of higher education that question the role of state and involve withdrawal of the state. If you see over the like in the last couple of decades, you will see that the state is trying to withdraw from the higher education system and trying to put market as the substitute. So that's the kind of overall structure that is happening. I'm not getting into the detail. So what is happening in these cases? There is I think the system is promoting an increase in the role of the market, clearly patronizing higher education as a marketable commodity. So initially I argued higher education as a public good. So that is being changed to, I'm not saying that completely it is being changed. I'm saying slowly this process is happening. So that is being argued as a marketable commodity. So this is giving increasing private provisioning of higher education. I will come to this point a little later. So what I think it is being called, even Simon Marginson, Varghese and Chattopadhyay, they got a recent book on changing higher education in India. So there they have argued, Bloomsbury publication, very interesting book, where I also, me and Thilo contributed a chapter in engineering education. They have argued that this is market-based public good. So we called public good, but now it is, we are provisioning, we are giving that good, but this is called market-based public good. So that is the kind of dilemma we are facing. So largely, we are recognizing what is happening in the process. In the process, this is what I found from my understanding is this. Largely, we recognize the individual economic benefits that one individual is getting from higher education. Because I said World Bank is also arguing that there is a highest economic returns that is being argued and that is being found and it is being said very clearly. But what we are not saying, which is very critical, is we are refusing to recognize the vast magnitude of social benefit that higher education produces. Until and unless we recognize that, so the nature of production of higher education changes. If you compare the higher education with any other market, let's say mobile or car, then that would be difficult because there also we are getting individual benefits. Here also we are getting individual benefits. That is being said very clearly. But what extra we are getting is not being recognized. And that is very dangerous to see. And it is a critical point to understand. So also in the other cases, as there are provisioning of higher education through private sector, we are seeing universities and colleges are knowledge factories. Kind of argument that is being given. So investment in higher education to maximize profit is the principle. It's not maximize. So when we're getting into the idea of maximizing profit, there we are largely ignoring the social benefits component. That is the main point that I want to bring. So let me get into the core idea given the time. So the inequalities in higher education is the core idea that we will be discussing. And I will discuss that in two components. I think I spelled out in the abstract. One is access component, another one is household investment. And they are well connected. In my lecture, you will definitely get, you are going to get it, how they are connected. So I will bring four important aspects. One is by gender, by economic classes, by regional dimension, that is regional and also interstate. And some cases I will bring rural-urban disparity. And the other one is inequality by aspects. So there are several layers of inequality. I will try to bring some of them through empirical evidence. I will have so much of data, but I will try to clarify. If there will be any point that is not being clarified, I will be happy to take the questions. Distribution of enrollment in higher education across various branches by gender. What is happening in the gender case that we are sometimes we are celebrating saying that we are getting more women in the higher education. But where are they going? In the STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, we are not getting many women. If you see here very clearly, arts and social sciences, we have a good number of women. Science, little less. But if you get into the medicine, in engineering and all, even in medicine, we are not getting that. In medicine, we have, in the medicine we have, but in engineering and technology, that is very less women. So if you see the 8%, and within engineering, I will get into that data, how many are male and female, that will be clear. So what I am trying to say that we are, our GER or even gender parity index in higher education is almost equalizing 1:1. But what is happening in that case, where they are going and why they are not getting into STEM courses is an important debate. And that is also what we call the missing women in STEM. Some of the research that is going on in that direction also. Women enrollment in higher and engineering education, if you see, higher education almost we are getting 50-50, but in Indian context, but engineering still less than 30% are women. So that's a clear case of where the women are missing. GR in higher education by gender between poor and rich, if you see, it is not only the gender, that it also interacts with expenditure quintile. This is the 1 is the poorest and 5 is the richest. There you see that there is a gap in other 1, 2, 3, 4 to some extent, but in the 5, among the richest, there is no gap. In fact, if you see, female are little higher represented in higher education than male. So who are the women who are suffering the most in higher education, who are not getting into the system? They are the people who are from economically poor section. So that is another important thing that we have to be very clear. So it's not only gender, we have to look at it very carefully with the other societal context. If you see the rich and poor gap, to start with, I have few other interesting facts, but to start with, we got at this, Tilak and myself, we published a work in social development report published by Oxford University. There we have given this. Here we have taken net state domestic product, NSDP at one hand, and the gross enrollment ratio. So what I'm saying, we have 4 quadrants. One is high, high, low, low, high, low, low, high. So there are 4 quadrants here. If you see the high, high, that means the states with high net NSDP, they are the states with high GER. So there is a clear at the macro picture that where the higher education is expanding, where the states are better economically. So there are some exceptions to it, very less like J&K having low NSDP but high GER, but that is one exception. Similarly, with high low, the other quadrant, there will be few exceptions, but majority of the states are lying on the idea that with high NSDP, high GER. If you see the participation in higher education between poor and rich from NSSO data, National Sample Survey Organization data 2017-18, that is the latest education round data that is available. So there, if you see the 1 to 5 poorest to richest, and enrollment share, there is a clear gap. The poorest are accessing 6 points and the richest are getting 51%. So there is a clear gap in that. I am not explaining one by one. Similarly, student distribution in professional higher education, I try to understand, which is, we took measure 4 disciplines, engineering, medicine, law, and management. There you see how the poorest to richest, poorest only 2.5% are into professional higher education. It is almost 73% in professional higher education who are the richest. And there is a clear increasing, like from 2.5 to there is an increase and it reaches to 73. Completed, who are, it's not only access, it's also completed level of higher education between poor and rich. It is to 13-14 data. If you see, it's not only their completion rate is also differ significantly. Only 3.7% are completing higher education who are from the poorest, and this is 62% who are from the richest. Gross attendance ratio, if you see who are attending higher education, there is a clear gap between poor and rich between 2007, 8 and 13 4 data. There is a clear gap that increasing, and the gap is very clear in that. So I'm not explaining one by one. GR in higher education between poor and rich by region, urban, rural, there is a clear. So what I try to understand, I try to look at across, like between poor and rich, again, what is happening with gender, what is happening with rural, urban, that brings a clarity on the issue. It's not only poor, rich, within poor, rich, between rural and urban, what happens. So there is a clear difference between this. For example, with the richest quintile 5 towards the end of the graph, if you see the urban rural gap is very high, very, very high. So it is what it is saying, the richest and being urban, they are the most advantageous position in accessing higher education, because they are the people who are like the rich, but they are in the rural area, they are also not able to compete with the people who are from urban. So there are different layers of this. Distribution, distribution of enrollment in engineering, particularly I work on engineering sector in detail. So we had a paper on this, now coming in one report with Professor Tilak. There we are trying to understand that with NSSO data very clearly, within poor rich, how the enrollment in engineering education differ. There is a clear gap in that. You see, in the Q1, only less than in 2017-18, only 3% are attending engineering, and that is almost 68% in the Q5, the richest. So there is a clear hierarchy in the access to engineering education also between poor and rich. Enrollment in higher education by social groups, if you see, this is another interesting idea, ST, SC, and OBC and general. If you see overall higher education, you see very clearly, only 6% are from scheduled tribe and 15% scheduled caste, and all others are from OBC. Very interestingly, OBCs are higher in higher education than even general. Professional higher education, they are further less, SCSTs. So I try to look at if this is happening with overall higher education, what is happening with professional courses, the situation is worse. If you see the SCST enrollment in engineering education again by gender, because I try to look at the double disadvantage. Being scheduled caste, being female, their percentage is very less. In 2018-19, the latest figure, if you see, 1.96% from scheduled caste, and it is less than 1% among scheduled tribes, 0.74. So these are the pictures that is I would say very serious figures that we need to get into the debates. I'm not getting into the debate as such. I'm giving some evidence, and later on I will give some understanding on the pictures or the figures. If you see the regional disparities, where I'm trying to look at the inter-regional, interstate, and rural urban, if you see the GR in higher education among different states, there is a clear hierarchy. Chandigarh in the top and Bihar in the bottom. And there are a few other UTs like Damandiu and Lakshadweep, they are further low. I have not shown them. But here you can clearly see there is a clear, more than 50% to less than 15%. And all India figure is 27-28%. There is a clear interstate variations. Regional distribution of professional higher education in India, where actually professional higher education in India are concentrated, I was trying to see. If you see, it is still in the southern part. That is being argued. Little less now because of the closing of several engineering institutions, but still they are the people who are where the professional higher education is higher. And the access rate is also higher. This is I am telling in the context of regional and interstate inequalities in the access to higher education. Share of professional higher education institutions to overall higher education institutions. How many are, because professional higher education, why I am focusing, because this is an interesting area that is going on, because we have a higher inequality in professional higher education sector. That's the point that is been coming up. Though there is a gap is being minimized at the overall higher education context, but it is being very high among professional courses. So that's the reason I have looked differently for professional higher education institutions for some cases. So if you see the share of professional higher education institutions is almost 13%, but it is very significantly. Like in Pondicherry, it goes close to 30% of total institutions in professional are in relation to higher. If you see what we did, we state-wise engineering institutions per 1 million population we calculated for 2018-19. There, if you see the dark figure towards the end, there the concentration is higher, which is almost many southern states. So there, per million population, how many engineering institutions are located is highest. And there are very 0 to 1 and all. If you see in Northeast and several other eastern states, it is very less. And some are in the middle, like Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra. And so there is a clear regional and interstate inequalities in access to higher education. And accordingly, that is being reflected in the enrollment also. Regional concentration of institutions, intake, enrollment in engineering education, it's not only institutions that lead to intake and that also lead to enrollment. So that's the point I want to bring. So where there is a higher institutions like concentration, there the intake is higher, that is obvious, and that leads to higher enrollment in those regions. We argue that there is a student mobility to higher access to higher education institutions, but I didn't find much. There is a mobility from other states, but that is not very, because that includes cost. Mobility always includes costs. And that is always, most of the cases, it is out of pocket. In engineering, most of the institutions are in private sector, almost 90%. So if you want to move, then your cost of accessing engineering education will go up. So that may be one of the reasons that they don't move, and that is being reflected here. I'm not saying they do not move entirely, but the movement may be less because there is a fear of cost. So if you see the completed level of higher education between poor and rich and also rural urban that I showed, within poor and rich, we are dividing among like them in the rural urban cases, because this is a double disadvantage. You will find very clear. The message is very clear. If you see the rich poorest one, that rural, this is very clear. Within the rural, if you see completed level, they are better. And the poorest in the urban is the most sufferer. So that is one important thing that we should understand, because they may be coming from informal sector, and also the poorest in the poorest in the urban is very different. The nature of poor, like poverty in the urban areas, is very different. In the bottom line, I am saying, bottom 2-3 lines. So there you will see very clearly that what the urban, who all are the urban poor, what constitute the urban poor. That matters. So that is an interesting area we can go ahead with further analysis, but I have not done here. That needs to be proved further. Rural-urban gap in professional higher education is very clear. If you see that clarity is that gap is very high within government and private. I have shown in the first part. So in urban, if you see in the rural, almost 25% in government institutions attend professional higher education, and urban it is 74. And similarly in private, rural attend 28 and urban is 71. If you see the discipline-wise within professional, the major 4 disciplines, if you see there is a clear gap between rural and urban, there is a huge gap in the courses, and total also there is a huge gap. 27% from rural area and 74% to 73% from urban area access professional higher education. These are all NSSO data. Inequality in gross attendance ratio also. If you see that very clearly, I took some in the urban divided by rural to show the intensity of inequality. 2007-8 and 17-18. So the 1.64 towards this last column, that shows that urban-rural ratio. That means if it would urban-rural equal, then it would be 1, but it is more than 1. That means more urban people are attending higher education, the gross attendance ratio. Similarly, male-female is very less, 1.08, but the point I mentioned earlier is where they are attending is an important concern to get into. It's not who only attending, but where they are attending, like STEM courses and all. That is a great debate going on. Then you see the highest inequality happens in Q5 and Q1. Q5 is the richest divided by poorest, and they are almost more than 5 times. That means if to 100%, 100 people are attending, let's say in higher education, only 20 people are from poorest and the rest are from richest. So Q5 divided by Q1 is highest, 5 times higher. So this is an important concern. Who completes higher education? If you see within poorest and richest, I did not take the other Q2, Q3, Q4. I compare with Q1 and Q5. If you see the within, let's say female, let us look at the female and belong to poorest quintile. They are only completion rate is 2.96 or 3%. And being, that is important, being urban and being poorest, only 1% completion. So there is a clear difference between poorest and richest in completion. One is almost 4% are completing from the poorest group, and from richest group, it is almost 62%. Yeah. So inequality in household investment, if you get into, Now let us get into, it's not only access, how much they are spending, how much time I have. I think I'm going little late, but anyway, yeah, this will take maybe 10, 15 minutes.
10 minutes max.
Okay, so let me then be fast on this. So inequality in household investment in higher education in India, it's not only access, it's also how much they invest out of pocket. So before getting into this is not one. Yeah, so before getting into, before getting into household, I thought let me show you some public expenditure figure. Per student expenditure in higher education in Asia Pacific region, if you see, India is spending only 2,458 rupees, which is very less than many other countries within Asia Pacific. I did not compare with advanced countries, but there are many advanced countries, they might be spending very high, and it's true, but India is spending very less on public. And that is one, why I am showing you the public expenditure figure, that is one of the reasons it is being argued that because of that led to higher household investment in higher education. So I'm not getting into, I will be little quick now. Public expenditure on higher education in India as a percentage of GDP, that is increasing a bit after this 15-16 budget estimate and this, but it's not that much. Even it is less than 2%, 1.5, 1.4%. And let me say very clearly, towards the end, we have little higher that rising trend, and there is a story behind it. Like we have, government of India is trying to expand the system. We are creating many IITs, IIMs, so there is a basic level of investment on that. So it's not that all institutions are getting good amount of public spending, but rather the new institutions which are coming up, new central universities, IITs, IIMs, for establishing themselves, they are getting good amount of money. So that might be increasing the overall budget. So that needs to be understood very clearly. So public expenditure on technical education, if you see where the highest privatization has happened as a percentage of total expenditure on education in 2 years I show, you will see very clearly that it's not very much. So that's one of the reasons what I'm trying to argue, that that leads to highest privatization in technical and engineering and technical education. Scholarship was an important issue in minimizing inequality, inequity. So that is also declining in most of the cases. University and higher education is declining. Technical education is increasing a bit, but even it is almost like overall spending on higher education as a out of the total expenditure on higher education is close to 1%. In some cases, it is less than 1%. So we are not spending a lot on scholarships. Household expenditure, let me get into that. If you compare some Asia Pacific countries, you will find that household expenditure on higher education as a percentage share of household median income, how much you are spending out of your income, that is very high in India, if you can see, and just below Pakistan, but it is higher than many other countries which are not economically better off. So that's the point I want to make. Household expenditure on higher education per student, my major area of study, if you see household expenditure on per student, rupees per annum, if you see very clearly, rupees in, I think it is in 1,000 rupees, because here in the 1,000, in the y-axis. So if you see the medicine, if you are sending one child to medicine, then 86,000 you are spending, engineering 71 per annum. So it is very clear that we are spending a lot, and that constitutes a significant share of household income. So if it was to family spending one child, sending one child, then they are almost consuming half of the total income on one side. So rest half is for entirely to manage many other aspects of the life. If you see expenditure on higher education as a proportion of total household consumption expenditure, that is what the household income, across major areas, it is very clear. If you see the medicine, I have put red. If you are sending one child for medical courses, MBBS, then you are spending half of your income. If you are sending one child for engineering, you are spending 46% of your total income. And if you are sending to others, like some other courses, technical courses, it is 31%. Even for humanities, if you are sending, you are spending 11% of your income for one side. So these are some of the figures. Per student annual household expenditure on higher education between poor and rich, if you see, this is very clear. From poorest to richest, how it happens. It's not their access. They are also spending the least, like the being from poorest to good. And that gives the kind of higher education they are accessing, quality of higher education, because this is a kind of reflection on the quality of higher education and the kind of spending they are making. Household spending on professional higher education, on fee and non-fee and total on professional, on for different poorest to richest, if you see, that clearly sees show an increasing trend. So I am getting little fast. Annual average household spending on engineering education is also very high, and there is a clear inequality between male, female, between rural, urban, between caste group. I have red is showing the inequality level, and also between poorest and richest. So what is happening? So if you see I am trying to summarize the financing funding pattern. So union government's allocation is stagnant almost or increasing a bit, and that increase is largely because of the new institutions that are coming up. Relative share of state governments declining in many cases. Many cases the state government's funding, because this is in the concurrent list, so that is one important finding that we are seeing. Household expenditure on higher education, which is called out-of-pocket expenditure, is rapidly increasing. NSSO data reveals that annual average household expenditure on higher education as a percentage of the income, that is household consumption expenditure, was 19.5% in 2007-8, and it has increased to 21% in 2017-18. So there is an increase. That means 21% you are spending if you are sending one child on overall higher education, and it is more than 50% for costly courses like MBBS, BTech, and all. So the question here is it willingness to pay or compulsion to pay from the household side? So that is an interesting question that needs to be debated. I have enough to say, but now I will stop it. If there will be any question on this, I will come to that point. So there is very many. What the other important point that is NEP been talked about, even many other countries' context it is being said, it is neither public nor not household. This is non-household or private funding. That is community and philanthropy and external aid. But that is actually very what you call minimal at the minimal level in India. Even we don't have detailed information on all that. Doing any research on this aspect is also problematic. Like I found that there is a data constraint. So what is happening? Overall, this kind of system that we are developing now, there is a privatization trap in higher education. So private sector is coming very huge in huge number, and that's what we are trying to see. There is a massive expansion of private higher education system. But what the point is, it is important to analyze who are the losers and who are the winners in the system. That's what is leading towards inequality in access to higher education. That's the argument that I am trying to put. There are more than 78% colleges are privately managed in India now, and it is increasing rapidly. 385 out of 993, and now it is the latest data is 143. Out of that, more than 400 universities are privately managed, and it is increasing very rapidly. So out of the total enrollment, almost 2/3 enrollment are in private higher education institutions. So there are mushrooming self-financing courses within public higher education institutions. This is another kind of privatization we are happening. And even Varghese and Tilak, they have argued very clearly, it's not only private sector. It is a kind of pseudo-privatization that is happening within public higher education institutions because they are offering self-financing courses. So there is something called PPP in higher education, use of public funds to strengthen that. I argue that it is public funds, it's not only because if you see that privatization is happening with private funding is different. But now privatization is happening with public funding. So that is what the PPP is trying to understand, that trying to give a picture that using public, because they get so much of subsidy on land, electricity, and many other, but their CSR or the contribution towards society is very, very minimal. Once they establish, there seems to be clearly private. So it is, I say it, privatization with public funding, which is very critical to understand. Philanthropy to profit, there is a clear this happening. Virtual halt of state-aided private sector is now happening. But interestingly, NEP 2020, the new policy considered philanthropy partnership model for providing quality higher education. So how the philanthropy is coming to higher education sector is an important debate. So these all raise serious equity concerns. I discussed a bit. So I want to question on like one important point: the publicness of public higher education system is being questioned. That's the entire argument that I'm trying to put. That what is left with public higher education system? So how far we are? What is the intensity or degree of publicness in the public higher education system? Growth of private universities and colleges, I said very clearly, this is increasing very rapidly. You can see the latest figure. Yeah. Enrollment share in higher education in India by institution type is also, you see that in several courses in engineering and all, the enrollment share in private, the blue one and the green one is government. There is a clear increase over the courses. Humanities it is least and engineering it is highest. Similarly, enrollment share in professional higher education by type of institution, that also differs very significantly in states. Some states the privatization is very high. In Telangana, you see, in professional higher education, the privatization is very high in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Uttar, towards the right side of the graph. Yeah. Which one? Chandigarh.
No, there is no private.
No, Chandigarh, there are not many private this. But there is also higher gross enrollment ratio. They are putting public into the picture. So that is one exception. Even Bihar, Odisha, many other states, though they are not doing much in the enrollment, but they don't have much private. Growth of institutions and intake by type of in engineering cases, I'm not getting into this, I'm skipping this. That within engineering, how the government-private distribution happens over the years. It is clear that almost 80% are in institutions, more than close to 90% institutions are in private, and intake is almost the same. Now let me get into some debates. These are some of the pictures. So we are trying to reforming higher education. Are we on the right track? That's the point we should be very clear. An extended debate on, give me only 2 minutes more, sorry for an extended debate on higher education and national development is clearly happening. We are trying to, as I said, we are trying to ignore the non-economic benefits very clearly. So those are not being recognized over those are being now recognized at the global level, but in India it's not happening. We are trying to recognize the economic benefits. But do market recognize this? We are trying to recognize in the literature, but is market is trying to recognize this or not? That is an important question. Growing demand for higher education, more and more secondary graduates are aspiring, but is the system ready to fulfill their aspirations? Because the aspirations are largely being fulfilled by private higher education institutions. But who all are accessing private higher education institutions? I showed you very clearly the data. National Education Policy 2020 targets to achieve GER of 50% by 2035. Who is going to fulfill this? Is it the private sector that is going to fulfill? Who all will be the potential beneficiaries if that is the case? Who all access to the limited seats available in elite public higher education institutions? So it's not only private. The public institutions, there are several public institutions in the country are elite in nature. And if you want to get into that, you need huge coaching investment. Like for JEE, NEET and other medical courses engineering, you need huge private investment from out of pocket. Who all will be able to do that? So that means the marginalized they don't have a space in elite, neither in elite public higher education institution nor in private. So where are they going then? That is an interesting debate issue. So what kind of education then we are getting? At some point of time, it was being argued that who are not being accessing higher education, marginal, let them give online education. Kind of argument that is happening. Where the youth aspiring higher education from disadvantaged groups will go? Neither elite nor costly private. So that's what the argument. Pandemic and the new crisis in higher education is happening. I am not analyzing that, but this is an interesting area. There is a new crisis in higher education because of the pandemic and how India is going to face the challenge. That is not yet known to us even. NEP and higher education, what does it offer? NEP offers said several interesting facts, but the idea is how we are going to get into that. I am not getting into that. There are many points that NEP has said, but how we are going to achieve that is an important point that needs to be understood. My last slide, I think, we know problems are well known. I think many of the many literature has said about this and all. Little empirically, I have tried to make my points. But what next then? So the point that I want to understand, I want to bring here is it is important to introspect where we are heading with the massive expansion of higher education in a global new liberal environment, because private sector is increasing, the participation of private sector is huge. The possibility of increasing philanthropic contributions and donations toward higher education needs to be revisited. That's what the NEP has said. But what would be the strategy is not clear. We are at the minimal level at this. The global understanding should be there is no alternative but to investment in higher education and higher education, because we always say, even economists and several social scientists are now joining, sociologists, it is critical investment in human development and capability to form the capability. So there is no alternative to this. So we have to maintain higher education as an egalitarian space. Otherwise, it's very difficult to take all of it on the same board. We have an array of hopes from NEP 2020. We have there are several critical writings on NEP. So next 20 years to shape the future of higher education in the country, but how we are going to minimize the inequality, giving equal access to all, that's an important thing. Higher education system needs reform, that we all agree, and it is very badly and urgently we need it, but when and how is still not clear. I again sincerely thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here, and I will be happy to take any question that comes to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we will let your two discussants discuss your paper, and we will then open the floor to questions. In the meantime, if some of you in the audience would like to ask questions, please, you can write them in the chat box and we will take them after the discussion with the two discussants. Thank you.
Okay, so I will start. So firstly, I would like to thank you, Pradeep, very warmly for this synthesis of your work on higher education. And it was really difficult for you to give this synthesis summarized in only half an hour. So thank you for that. And I can add that most of this work you have done it with Jondiala Tilak over the last 5 years. So I must say, and Claire will confirm that it has been a great pleasure for me to discover your work, which is both empirically robust and intellectually stimulating. So indeed, on the question of the expansion of the Indian higher education, its massification, its privatization, the outsider, as me, the outsider reader, can run the risk of drawing as a subject has filled entire libraries. If not drawn, then she may go mad, as figures and conclusions differ from study to study, from source to source. An indicator as simple as gross enrollment ratio can vary from double to simple from one study to another. So in such a context, it is fortunate to come across Pradeep works. So I have just two questions and very general questions. It is not about the data. Maybe Claire, she will have a question on that. But it is more general and philosophical questions. So my first question is about the links between massification of higher education in India and democratization. There are many scientific controversies on this issue, on this topic. Pierre Bourdieu, for instance, observed in relation to the massification of French higher education in the 70s that one could not speak about democratization because the gaps between social fractions were reproduced. He spoke of a general shift in access opportunities that led to a reproduction of inequalities. Later, in a text he wrote with Patrick Champagne entitled Les exclus de l'intérieur, he updated this model by relating it to the very strong multiplication of university streams, which blurred the perceptions of students and their families. He then talked about excluded from within, students who occupy position of relegation in this space, for instance, in certain fields, such as social sciences, which offer little chance of success and a fortiori of social ascension, and especially when the students do not have a solid cultural capital. So what can be said about the Indian model of massification? Is it a real democratization of higher education here, with a reduction in the gaps between social groups? Or is it a reproduction of social inequalities that shifts the gaps to higher levels? Or maybe a partial democratization of varying according to the fields of study and specialization. In other words, how can this model be made more complex? So my second question is about the hyper-specialization of Indian higher education as a result of its privatization.
Sorry, can you repeat the first?
The hyper-specialization of Indian higher education as a result of its privatization. And therefore, on the place occupied by India in an education market that is now global, in a global education order. So one cannot but be struck by the unprecedented expansion of engineering schools over the past 20 years and beyond narrowly specialized vocational training. So this is a trend that you have perfectly well shown. So, and we know that most of the places in this school remain unfilled, with supply exceeding demand. And you didn't mention this in this presentation, but I read your work and you have shown that graduates of this school, I mean engineering school, hardly find jobs. And when they do, they are largely underqualified. So recently, the Indian government banned the opening of new engineering schools. So conversely, the classical scientific stream, I mean maths, biology, physics, but also the social sciences as a whole, are in an inexorable decline. They seem to be the places of relegation for new entrants from the poorest, and you show it very well, from the poorest section of Indian society. The private colleges that venture to open such courses in social sciences, for instance, do so only with a view to professionalization. No more basic knowledge, only applied knowledge. Does this mean that India is specializing in producing technicians for the global IT industry? But then, what about the future of India itself? To quote Jandiala Tilak, I quote him, these disciplines, the humanities, natural and physical sciences, are essential for the building of a human society. Moreover, these disciplines are essential for the very perpetuation of a good education systems. An imbalance in educational development is not good for society. A local government that loses control of its national higher education system risks losing its national autonomy. So, end of quotation, Jandiala Tilak. Be assured, France's position on this issue, is not much better. This weekend, for instance, we learned that less than half of the positions open to school teacher has been filled because of a lack of candidates with the minimum required level. So this is a general question, but what do you think about these developments for the future of India? So maybe you can
respond to these two.
I think if you do not mind, we would first take Claire's comments, and then if you're fine, then you can respond, and then we'll take the Q&A.
Okay, so first, thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank you so much for all the articles you wrote, because they were major landmarks actually for us and for our work. So just as a first point, I'd like to mention that a lot of reports in India recently have highlighted that actually the gaps between men and women in higher education is reducing a lot, as you also mentioned. And I find it really, really important to also say that they go in different streams, as you also mentioned. But I wanted to say maybe, and if you have any thoughts on that, that even when women graduate from higher education, a lot of them actually afterwards do not take up a job. So they have graduated, they completed their higher education degree, but then they just rapidly get married after this. And so even though we can say that the gender gap is closing in higher education, as your study shows, as the NSSO data shows, also as, almost every report shows, but I wanted to have your opinion on the fact that this gender gap could be misleading, as when you think about what happens after graduating. Also, second point, what I also noticed with the data you used for NSSO in 2017-18 is that we can actually witness a reduction in the inequality between economic groups, a slight reduction. But I wanted to know, because the NSSO data is only looking at data within India. So it's only people residing in India. And I wanted to know whether it could be possible that this reduction in inequality could be linked with a brain drain, meaning maybe the inequalities are reducing, but maybe also because the richest graduates go abroad to do their studies. So that is also a question that I found really interesting. And my third and last point would be, were you at some point, or did you come across articles that were evoking inequalities based on fathers and mothers' education? Because when I looked at this data and on all the papers, including yours, that were published on inequality in higher education, it came across me that actually the diploma of the parents are highly important when it comes to inequalities, even within the richest group and the poorest group. So I thought that maybe if you had any thoughts on that too, that would be also highly interesting for me. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Would you like to address this question?
Yeah. These are burning questions. So you have asked very heavily loaded questions. I don't think I have a ready-made answer for that, but I can attempt, given my understanding on the issue. Let me take the second question first, which is on expansion. There is an expansion, but there is an inequality in the expansion in terms of disciplines. And that we have said very clearly in one of our writings, that in how actually within, it's not only interdisciplines, even intra-discipline differences are there. Within engineering, we have looked at where is it IT-related courses within engineering or traditional courses within engineering. And there are several interesting facts we have. So what is happening, the point that we are trying, like the point that is being, that needs further debate, I think there is not enough debate we have not created yet, is regarding these foundational skills of the graduates. If we are producing technicians as such, and what is happening in the current scenario is a dangerous phase we are passing. And at some point of time, and why it is dangerous, one or two important points I want to bring in. One important point that we should relate this to the changing nature of work. I think we all might have seen this 2019 World Development Report, which is on changing nature of work. That clearly says that labor market changes very frequently. And to adapt with the labor market, you need foundational skills. So it is being empirically evident the graduates or the students who have foundational skills, they can switch to the other jobs better and frequently and quickly, easily, than the students who are even highly qualified, but they have some technical skills. So the technical skills can be updated in a short term, but foundational skills, to build foundational skills, that needs time. And our system, Indian education system, I found, and it's not only at the problem is not at the higher level, it is also at the school level. School level also, we are not like secondary graduates and secondary level and all. There is foundational skills that is not happening. And it is extreme. This is extreme at the level of vocational education, where we are very poor at it. We are trying to expand, but that is not giving the kind of skill that is required for the graduates. And I want to link that again with the main idea of privatization. Because with the huge privatization of higher education, we are producing graduates, but what kind of graduates? That is an important. There are some institutions in engineering discipline and also in a teacher training discipline. I would bring in that BEd program, teacher training programs. So much of privatization is happening, and there it is being evident that colleges are running without any engineering. There is no laboratory. So how we are trying to train the graduates? Even in some cases, it was being said that some BEd colleges, even you need not to attend even a single class, but you might be getting the certificate. So the kind of things that is happening at the ground level is important to understand. So we are producing a lot. In number, we are increasing. But we are not doing two important things. One is we are not heading towards an equitable society by giving access to the marginalized. Second one is at some point of time, we are producing graduates which are unemployed, like their employability is being questioned. It's not employment only, it's also employability. In some cases, it is being found that the employers, they go to the institutions, they have some need, but they don't get a single or say the required number of graduates because they found that graduates are not up to the mark to be employed. And it's also not possible to invest a lot by the employer to train them. So something is being, because as an employer, you have some expectation from the graduates. And if you are not getting that expectation, then definitely you will say big no to them. And you will try somewhere else. And another thing that is linked, I think I want to respond to your question linked to this, is the brain drain. The brain drain is happening in this context. The top bracket who are produced from IITs, IIMs and all that, I think the Silicon Valley in US is full with Indians, IIT graduates. So the best minds are again moving out because they don't have a scope to work there. Even doctors, even engineers and many technical personality. Even I would say this is new, there is evidence is required among social scientists also. Do we find good social scientists in the country? Or they are moving to some other universities in US or Europe or some other parts of the world at the other level. So it's not only at the Silicon Valley who are represented, it's also the social scientists. Who are the best social scientists, social minds, who are critical thinkers? Where are they? Are they in Indian universities? That needs to be questioned. Empirical evidence is still not coming on social science. We need to look at it very clearly. So that is it.
But the first question that you said about the democratization, and also or the reproducing social inequalities, my presentation is very clear on this, that how it is actually reproducing social inequalities. If the democratization, that is, but the kind of data that we see, that there is a marginal increase in the poorest, there is a marginal increase among the, let's say, the lowest caste group, let's scheduled tribes and all. But then in that pace, if we move, then when we will be equal, kind of.
Yes,
We need an egalitarian society, egalitarian education system, inclusive education system, inclusive Indian society. Then when we are going to attempt to reach that level, it's very, very difficult. We can't be happy by increasing marginally point something. We should be there should be drastical policies on like some, what do you call it, very revamped and well-structured policies to bring this. The slow movement of this kind will never happen, like marginally increasing. So that stage, I think we are into the knowledge economy, we are competing at the global level at this kind of pace. It's very difficult to argue anything ahead. So that kind of problem we are going to face, and it's very serious at the global level, and we must think about on these issues. Then let me come to some other issues, technical issues, serious, very clearly, that you said about female labor force participation. I think India is a country which is having the lowest female labor force participation. And the irony is it is declining. The dilemma here, what you said, is there is an increase in the higher education of the women, but they are not working. So education is not the only reason for getting into the labor market. That is maybe one of the reasons, but there are several other social and cultural reasons. There are studies, I want to quote a few work that have said very clearly, even highly educated women, they are not coming because their husbands earn a lot. So their husbands earn a lot, that substitute them, they feel that we need not to work. Because my husband has enough income to survive, to lead a luxury life, so why I should be there in the labor market? Why should I? That is one. There are several cultural reasons. And it is being said that the people having highly educated, like other members, they are the people who are not allowing women to work in many cases. They are in-laws. Because there are cultural issues, there are social stigmas, there are prestige, many other things that actually work. And sometimes they feel that taking care of baby is more important than getting into the labor market. So given the cultural settings, because in many states patriarchy is too much. So in that context, these are the some ways. And another interesting thing I think we should bring in this female labor force, we should examine that what is happening with the highly educated women and why they are not getting into that. There are some studies that clearly bring this. These are some sociocultural norms and all that, but it needs further exploration on these dimensions. The other one, I think you said about by education level, that is an interesting culture, what you call social and cultural capital, that your education capital, we can say, at the family level, but not much is being said. We need for even I did not attempt in that this, but you should do that. Like not only father, mother, I would say, you to look at the other level members of the family, because sometimes other members of the family matters a lot, and there you can link why that inequality is happening. It's you may be surprising finding that okay, in some level of education, like with increasing in the level of education, sometimes they may not like saying that you get into the higher education. I don't know what is the story. Usually you might find a trend, increasing trend, but sometimes but what is happening in the analysis is we see only education, but you should look at education with some other socioeconomic setups. Then you look at it cross-sectional. Then you find some interesting stories. What is happening in rural areas? What is happening among the poorest? What is happening among the richest? Then all that, different levels, and also at different levels of education, at technical level, higher level, and all. So that would give some other interesting stories also. And it is worthwhile to examine that really with the recent data. Thank you.
So we have quite a few questions already in the chat box, and we will of course take oral questions too. May I ask maybe Nicolas Gravel, who's written a rather long question in the chat box, to Nicolas, would you mind maybe asking the question yourself? And I think that Sonu Bagri also has asked a question, so we will ask these people first, and then we will move on to another round of questions.
Yes, sure. So thank you very much for this nice presentation, very illuminating. So I just have perhaps one slightly technical question and one perhaps more general suggestion on some follow-up on this. So my question was about, I was a bit surprised by the relatively low gender inequality that your data seem to reveal in terms of access to higher education. In a study that we did with Tista Kundu is here, which was based on the last round of completed NSSO data, which is quite old now, 2012. which was based on the people who were below 30 and 40 years old. And so we were not looking exactly at the gross enrollment rate, but as the fraction of that population who had, let's say, a tertiary education degree or this kind of thing. The gender inequality that we had was much bigger than what you show, was huge. So I'm kind of impressed. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the data you use to calculate those gross enrollment rates. So they must be more recent, and they must be based on a specifically young age group. So in the sense, these data are very encouraging about the trend, but perhaps you can tell us about that. And my second, more suggestion is with respect to the end of your talk, when you quite justly notice the growth, the spectacular growth of the private higher education sector. And so it has grown impressively in India in the last 10 years or 15 years. And so what will be interesting to see then is to see to what extent there are differences between those two higher education institutions with respect to inequality. Are the private universities more unequal with respect to genders and caste, let's say? Or are they less unequal than public one? I mean, and could we have some data to assess this? This could be very interesting, huh? Because I mean, it obviously raises a lot of interesting issues. So that's it. Thank you for your presentation, and nice to seeing you again.
Thank you, Nicolas. I think that Sonu Bagri also has a question.
Not sure he's online.
Okay. Maybe can you go on the chat box and we will read it out ourselves? And then we can, if you don't mind, then you can answer these questions.
We'll get a few more.
I think there must be another message first, because this starts with seconds. So
He's online.
Yeah, that's why it's blue.
You can unmute.
Sonu Bagri, would you like to speak and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hey, if I may, I hope I'm not bothering anyone with this voice. My apologies. Thank you, Dr. Choudhury. If I have the permission, may I ask the question?
Please do.
Thank you. So thank you for this paper, Dr. Choudhury. I actually really wanted to attend this there in person. My apologies, Nehru. My apologies, Nehru, and everyone there got stuck with the work and couldn't. So this is the question. So I teach humanities at my own center, Center for Critical Studies in Rohini. And I teach humanities, so history, political science, social science, and English language in particular. Because usually I've also seen that people who are not able to deal with humanities, they also have an issue with the language as well. So we need to find if it's a language issue or the subject issue. But how would you share some specific steps that, let's say, if you were to share it with this teacher who's actually teaching students on the secondary school? So a lot of challenges that you have shared, I would say I know a little bit about them because I'm actually teaching them at my own center. And before the pandemic, it was already so tough. And now it's even tough because online access, and you know better than I do that internet is not there with a lot of poor people. So that becomes first of all the challenge. But still, how would you, to me as a teacher, suggest some specific steps that I can take to ensure that this gap I can bridge and, well, let's say, do my job? Thank you, Dr. Choudhury, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, would you like to take this first round of questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Nicolas, for interesting questions. These are very interesting. And also that would give me input for further thinking. Thank you. The one is gender inequality in higher education. We have two important data sets for this. One is we have the recent All India Survey of Higher Education. All India Survey of Higher Education 2019-20. So it is being conducted from 2010-11, 11-12, 10-11, 11-12. So we have a decade data of this, and there it says that if there are total enrollment given and then gender-wise enrollment given by subject-wise also. So if you see the share of women to total enrollment, it is almost 49%, 48.6% in the latest rank. That means out of the total students who are enrolled in higher education in the entire system, half of them are women. Half of them are women. So that means there is a gender parity index is being calculated, and that gender parity index is coming out to be 1, close to 1, not exactly 1, 0.99596 kind of.
So at that point, we are saying there is an increase, and that was a little less in that, let's say, previous years. Even at the, what you call, discipline level, it is being calculated. Let's say you can calculate the share of women in the, out of the total. And there you will find very clearly that in technical courses, like engineering and other, their representation is very less. As I said, in engineering, or less than 30% are women. So 70% are men, like male students. So there is a clear this. The other important, this is at the institutional level, this data is being collected and self-reported from the higher education institution. I think this is the best data we have at the country on higher education, getting the picture updated. More or less similar picture you will get from UGC annual reports, because almost they take the same source. The other important data set that we get is from the demand side, that is NSS. I think you have worked on this extensively. So National Sample Survey, the latest one is 2017-18. So there we try to calculate the gross attendance ratio. So that gives the how many are attending higher education. So there you have 18 to 23 total population group, and let's say the total 18 to 23 female. Out of that, how many are attending this and their share. So that means, you know, that how we calculate in that, like total enrollment or attending female in higher education divided by 18 to 23 population of female into 100. If you take the denominator, we put all enrollment. If you put that into 18 to 23 age group, then this becomes a net attendance ratio. But usually in higher education, we are not bothered about net. We always calculate gross. In school level, we calculate net because there is a specific age group. So there in the numerator where we are taking the enrollment, we are not getting into the age, but we are taking who all have enrolled and then divided by their population in the age group of 18 to 23. So there you will get the gross attendance ratio. Similarly, you will calculate for male. And you will find that there is a clear difference in that, what you call, in their population group wise. And if you see socioeconomic groups, then it is further. Like if you look at the poorest, then among the, what you call, socially, let's say the lower caste and all, there the gender inequality further increases. So that's the way I have looked at it at the moment. But even if you are saying that there will be, you found a significant higher gender equality, you would say in this, then I would cross-check again in my data set if there is any I don't think there is any technical issue as such, because I cross-checked thoroughly. But still, I will be happy to cross-check again why there is an increase. But there is obviously there is an increase in the gender equality. That I said very clearly. But the gender inequality is seen differently, because that is at overall level. But at the discipline level, there is a clear gender inequality that is there. That needs to be understood very clearly in STEM courses and all. Getting into the second question, which is what you call very interesting, by saying that government private. I think I was trying to give that. I have done that analysis, but because of this, I thought it will be too much. It will be too much to get into so much of debate. So within government private, it is important to look at it. I can't straight away say that, okay, in the government it would be less and the private it would be higher. Because in government also, getting into elite public higher education institutions is still problematic. I said very clearly. How many can you, if anyone get into an IIT, I think a sociologist will say better doing field work. I think many cases we have done, IIT Chennai, Madras and all, we have done gender analysis in this. I think Ajanta Subramaniam and all, they have said on caste and other things. How many of you will get women, belong to scheduled caste, belong to rural area and being poor? If there will be 4 layers of discrimination, being from poor family, being a woman, being from scheduled caste, belong to rural area, will you get a single student in IIT? I doubt. I doubt whether we will get a single student of that kind in elite public higher education institutions in the country. Because they are like discriminated at different levels and reaching like you feel, suppose I will add one more, being Muslim. So it would be really, really difficult for them. So kind of inequalities at different levels, and it is important to understand these inequalities very clearly at the, at the ground level. And that's what we are actually losing in the process. And that needs to be seen. And overall, I would say at the private level, this discrimination is higher because there the cost is higher. And you know that household always prefer to invest more on boys. There is a pro-male bias in household investment. There is huge literature on this. Pro-male bias in Indian households, Indian families. That if there is one boy, one girl, they will always prefer to invest on sons. That may be less among in the urban belt or among richest, but still it is huge. And that might lead to less investment in public, private, sending the women to private higher education institutions. And there are other socio-cultural factors. If it is located far away places and all that, that also matters. But it's important to look at. I have looked at some point. but particularly technical courses, but we engineering, but we can look at it in general. The other important point, I think the last point that the other professor told, very interesting, that how a teacher can minimize. That is, I am also a teacher, I teach in a university. So what I feel as a young teacher, I feel that when we enter into the classroom, classroom space is yours. Nobody is trying to snatch out. So that space we should use effectively. That is my point. So let us impart some education, impart some training to the students, which will really benefit them in their real life and foundational skills, critical thinking. These are the things we need. And as a teacher, you can impart, nobody else. So as a teacher at the higher level, if you are teaching, we have a great responsibility towards classrooms. And other important thing, nowadays classrooms are becoming complex. Complex in the sense the composition of classroom is changing because of the changing nature of higher education. So earlier elite people were coming. Now some people from socially marginalized sections are also joining the class. So there also you need a different pedagogy altogether maybe, or intervening with them differently. Then only you will be able to reach them. And it's important to reach them in the class, because the importance of class for marginalized sections is, I found, is relatively higher than others, because others have sociocultural capital to get out and learn something. But these are the students who are from marginalized sections. They see classroom as an important space for them. So if important space for them, they let us engage in the dialogue with them. Let us have a dialogue, separate dialogue I would prefer, even at the outside the classroom. Let them give free hand to interact with you as a teacher. Don't put all this hierarchical setup that you come this time, that, and I feel that, and I'm trying to practice that also at my level, if that is possible. So that will really help them to interact a lot and to come up with the kind of trap like that they have. And that there I see the critical role of a teacher. And that is most, and that is not happening with many. In many feudal state universities, you might see that they are very feudal in nature. For example, the teachers, and they might not be allowing students to interact freely. So that actually hinders the students to think. And that will lead, even if they have got access to the classroom, they are not getting the kind of benefit they are expected. And even at the public higher education institutions, forget about private. Private is something like excluded in many cases. And anyway, many people may not be reaching to the private who are from bottom level. So at the public higher education institutions, we should have the responsibility of doing this. And we must do that. And there you are doing a great job.
So we are actually quite short of time. So maybe we can take a few more questions. Odile, you want? Okay.
Yeah.
You want to respond, and then if you don't mind, and as a follow-up, I can see that there are a few questions. I'm sure so we will take short questions and please short answers so that we can finish not too late. Please.
Just a really short point about the gender inequality. Actually, I think that Nicolas Gravel mentioned the national sample survey, like the 68th round, and this is not a round based on education. It's based on household consumption expenditure and on employment and unemployment. And actually what we found in the literature generally is that the data from this NSSS round and the one especially focused on education, they give quite different figures. And the second point is also that you were looking at people between 30 and 40 years old in 2011, whereas this is about 2017-18 amongst people who are like 20-year-olds. But even if you were looking at the exact same population, the two studies, like the two surveys, they actually give out really different numbers.
Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, like really different. And just about the point about like the inequality within the public or the private sector, the wealthiest graduate students, so students who are enrolled in higher education, they are highly overrepresented in the private sector, whereas the poorest students are highly underrepresented in the private unaided sector. Just to add that this is backed by like empirical evidence. It is really clear in the data.
Thank you very much for this precision. So we have a few questions from the floor. Maybe there are questions also online. So first we'll take the questions from the floor. Actually, you don't need to move it too much. It's fine. You can speak. Normally, it's fine.
Am I audible?
You are audible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Dr. Arvind and I teach at Center for Study of Social Exclusion in Jamia Millia Islamia. So my prism would be of social exclusion to look at the things. And just to add to the discussion going on about the gender disparity, I would want to point out to the fact of invisibility of women labor also, because like, we often see, even if not in higher education, there is the social prejudice, because we see like, disparity in also in terms of like, minimum wages. So a woman is capable of maybe, putting up like, 20 bricks in 20 minutes, and, men maybe more, and that is put in as a logic that they are performing more, and therefore like, this. But in terms of higher education, I think there is a social prejudice attached to this, that why like, in popular Hindi movies, you will see psychology, sociology, and even school teaching would be a preferable job for women and not going to engineering. So that is, I think, like, one of the, indicator which we must look at to. And to pointed question to very specific slide number 18 and 23, when you said like, when we compare the poor and rich and their like, representation, I think one must look also into the intersectionality of who is poor and who is rich. So there in Indian context, it is caste. And if I constitutional categories, if we use, and if I do not go by say Adivasi, Dalit and Sudras, but specifically the SCs, STs, and the OBCs specifically. So we often say that there are more SCs and more OBCs and more Dalits who are more poor when compared to like, the general categories. And with specific, slide 23, I would want to say, Pradeep, and I would want to have this because we studied at the same university, and what is generally said, like, in left liberal culture, we debate about caste class question. In the Constituent Assembly itself, it was debated, and Mark Galanter has done a beautiful paper on who are the other backward classes, because there is still this confusion whether they are class or caste. So there is this intersectionality of, in India, class is, say, enveloped in caste, if I may say. So your comment on that. Thank you.
I think, Krista, you have a question. I have a short question, and let's see if we have questions online. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a very interesting presentation. I just want to know that, do you have any insights on completion rate? Because we are here talking about gross enrollment ratio. And the point raised by Nicola and kind of clarified by Claire as well. Here we're looking at the highest level of education, the share of people who have completed tertiary education as their highest level of education. And don't you think that gender inequality is much more much higher whenever we're talking about competition? Because I have another work on school education at elementary level, and there even I have also seen that gender equality it's much more gender equal when we're talking about enrolling to school, even enrolling to secondary schools. But whenever we're talking about finishing elementary level or finishing grade 8 level education, even for grade 8, and I'm not even talking about higher education, we see that males are more likely, more probable to finish, to complete that education. So whether these survey, for example, this education survey has any insights on that, or whether do you have any insights from your research on education that women, they're entering almost equally, 50% of male and female in the enrollment, but they're finishing less. They're not completing as much as the males. That was my question.
Do we have questions online? I'll ask my question in the meantime. So, Pradeep, thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned among the multiple layers of inequalities, gender, caste, economic level, and in one of your answers, you briefly mentioned if on top of this you're Muslim, then you're really doomed. If on top of this you're Muslim, then you're really doomed. Now, I work on Muslims in universities, so I'm particularly interested in this question. Are you able to capture in your data the disadvantage that Muslims in particular face, because we all know, especially since the Satchar Committee report, that on average Muslims have lower levels of education, that it's more difficult for them to join, the higher education system and then to find qualified employment after that. So are you able to capture this? Because I didn't find the Muslim category at all in your tables. Thank you. Yeah, I think you can answer, and we will finish with this because actually we've already
So I will start with you. It's very interesting. That is an interesting idea that we are nurturing. Currently, I am writing a paper. It's almost ready. So I am writing for a good book that they are bringing, a group bringing on Muslims in higher education, which is least explored, I would say, in the Indian context. So I will be happy once it is this I will send to you. There we are trying to bring that. But in this particular case, I didn't see. But in some of the papers we have written, we have looked at that the Muslim group in engineering education paper that is there in CSD. Council for Social Development, that long 150 pages, that which Professor Tilak, there we have looked at Muslim a bit, that where they are located, but you can easily pull out because Muslim category is there in NSSO and we can find it. That. But what happens that the idea so far which been nurtured in this domain is Muslim with others. But within Muslims, what are the differences that is happening is being less nurtured. And that is an important question that needs to be understood very clearly, and that will help. But the only problem that I would say, I think she would be very saying more that she would be better to clarify that the sample size becomes little less with the kind of NSSO. If you are only taking higher education then among Muslims, then you will have few people. So it's very difficult. Sometimes people question on that. And it is genuine to question. It is logical to ask questions because you are getting, let's say there are crores of like millions of people who are Muslim, but you are finding only hundreds and analyzing on that. So that representation, whether it is represented or not, is a question. So that's the reason at the micro level sometimes we do not. Why we don't find many studies at the state level from NSS. So one of the reasons is that at the particular state, if you are analyzing, then your sample size will be too less, and it is not advisable to analyze on state wise. At least at the all India level, you can analyze. That's the kind of. But we see interstate differences, but with caution. Like you have to give a footnote saying that okay, this is not the kind of picture that may not. There may be some plus minus in that because of the sampling problem. So that is one. So it is interesting, and I have looked at the engineering. In this particular case, I didn't. I put one slide before, but then I deleted because I also became very choosy in this because still it became long. So that's the reason I have some information, but I did not share. The other coming to your completion, I have a slide in this in slide number 31. You can see go and back if it will be there in this. You can see there I have looked at completion level of higher education. I think I went a little fast, so I skipped a bit. So there I saw that how it is happening. The completion level, if I looked at for income quintile wise, like poorest to richest, poorest completion rate is only 8%, and richest it is 78%. So there is a clear hierarchy.
No, I'm not talking about the rich poor, I'm talking about male female.
Yeah, male female that I have, but within rural urban I have seen, but within male female I have not given here. But definitely there will be difference because the dropout among female in higher education is very high. But interestingly, we don't have dropout data in higher education. We have only dropout data up to class 12. We don't have any information on dropout in higher education, which is an interesting issue, and in the COVID context, it is becoming more important that who all are dropping out. But we don't have single, even not a paper you can find on dropouts in higher education. And we should get into that debate. Usually we don't go because we don't have information, like economists like us. But sociologists can go going for case studies and now finding out actually where it is happening. And many women are actually dropping out. Yeah, many women are being dropping out. And
your reason would be that it's priced. Higher education is often a lot of out-of-pocket expenditure.
Out-of-pocket expenditure is huge. And they are also, we don't send the women to them.
Because indeed, I found high dropout.
Yeah, high dropout, that is not being discussed in the literature, not at the policy level also. Only school dropout is being discussed. Higher education, the dropout is very high at some point of time. But let's say at some cases, but we don't know what is happening. Empirically as also theoretically, also at the policy level. Then you see their caste-class interaction is there, and that actually works in OBC cases and all. So there is a separate debate, but we can, here I think, less time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, everyone.
And thank you to you, Pradeep Kumar Choudhury. Thank you to Cyril Henry and Claire Calvel for the discussion. We are happy to announce that our next seminar will take place on the 16th of June. It will be a talk by Thomas Blom-Hansen from Stanford University on vernacular urbanism, memory, and social segregation in a Deccan city. Please note that the timing will be exceptionally different. So it will be at 9 a.m. Because of the time difference with California. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.